Okay, good morning, everyone. Parak Zayin, Mishna Bays, and the Mishnah reads, Va'oid klal achar amru. Another rule, the sages said, regarding Shemitah and beer. Beer, as we said yesterday, the mitzvah that when the animals when the animals in the field, when the wild animals don't have the food available to them, when you've collected that food, you've got to take out of your house and render it ownerless. Kol she'enoi ma'achal adam, anything that is not human food, u'ma'achal behema, or is it animal food? We may not save them, nor is it, or if it's not anything that's used for dyeing, umiskayim ba'aretz, but it lasts in the ground. Meaning, if you leave it in the ground, you don't detach, you leave it in the ground, nothing will happen to it. Yesh lo shavias. In this case, these kinds of plants will have the sanctity of Shemitah, u'ladam of shavias, and their money. The money you exchange for them will have the sanctity of Shemitah. Ein lo beer, but there is no law of beer that applies to it. Ein ladam of beer, nor will the money have beer, as we said yesterday. If there's a plant, a fruit, a produce that has beer, needs beer, has to be done to it, and you exchange it for money. When the time for beer comes, you got to do it with the money. You got to take the money out of your house and do it ownerless. So just 1 second. Okay. So what's interesting is that we have in this Mishnah differently than yesterday. Yesterday was mentioned that if it is human food, animal food, or used for dyeing, that's what you need for after the sanctity of Shemitah. And now the Mishnah is saying you don't. So it's not really a contradiction, because the main point and the main difference between yesterday's Mishnah and this Mishnah is regarding the law of beer. When it comes to the actual law of the sanctity of the produce itself, although the Mishnah calls the examples that the Mishnah is about to give, and it's not animal food or human food, nor is it dye stuff, nonetheless, the case here is the following. Now, again, we got to work this through. When we're talking about the foods that we're saying are not human food, they're not animal food, what that really means is that it's typically not animal food or human food, but it would be eaten under duress. That's what it means. It's not typically food, but since it's edible under duress, nonetheless, the Mishnah is teaching us that that all these things that would be used under duress, whether it be for the animal food or for the human food or even for the dye stuff, although typically it's not used when duress, it would be used. That's enough for it to be categorized as human food and animal food and dye stuff. So although the Mishnah used the words that it's not that way, the Mishnah really means to say you would have thought it's not that way because it's typically not that way. But since under duress it is, because it would be eaten as food and used for food or animal food or human food or for dye stuff, halacha is that it does have the sanctity of Shemitah. However, the main part of the Mishnah is that it doesn't have the mitzvah of beer. So for the mitzvah of beer, you need that it should be considered a human food or an animal food or a dye stuff. That's for sure. It needs to fall under that category. If it doesn't fall under that category, it's not going to have beer. It's not going to have beer. And even if it does fit the other categories, meaning it is a human food, and it is animal food, or it is a dye. If it's something that will last in the ground, then again, the halacha is not going to have beer. Now, let's try to understand what this means. So the first thing is we mentioned this before, that if it's something that lasts in the ground, that means that it's always available for the animals in the field. And if it's always available for the animals in the field, there's no beer. Beer, from the Torah, we derive from the words of the Torah, beer only applies by a food that will eventually not be available for the animals in the field. But something that can stay in the ground and nothing happens to it, that's something that's always available for the animals, and therefore there's no mitzvah beer for it. But let's say the other part of the category the Mishnah says, which is that it's not food, or it's not animal food. So there, we're going to see the explanation is, why is there no mitzvah beer then? There's no mitzvah beer then because of the fact that, again, although we say it has the sanctity of food because of the fact that we'd use it under duress, nonetheless, Beer depends on whether the wild animals would be eating from it. That's the point. When the wild animals can't eat from it anymore, it's not available for them anymore, then you have to take that out of your house. But it's understood that that would be going only on something that only going on something that's eaten or normally eaten. But something eaten under duress is not something the wild animals would eat, and therefore, since it's not food that's relevant to the wild animals, there's no mitzvah beer. So that would be the explanation to the part of the Mishnah that's telling us that for beer, you're going to need two conditions. Even if the food has a sanctity of Shemitah because it can be eaten or used under duress, that's not going to be a reason enough of a reason to say that it has beer. Beer needs to be a food that is eaten in a way that we can say the animals in the field would eat it. But something only eaten under duress, not something the animals in the field would eat, and therefore beer doesn't apply. Although it has the sanctity of Shemitah, it's not going to have the mitzvah of beer. That's one thing. And then even if you had something that is considered food or it's considered diet stuff, but it lasts in the ground, which means it's always available for the animals. So then again, there's no beer because beer only applies to things that at some point will not be available for the animals in the wild anymore. Now, an interesting question the Yad Avram brings down, and that is that we are saying that in order for something to have the mitzvah of beer, then the halacha is excuse me one second. Okay. We are saying that when something wasn't considered food, there's no mitzvah of beer because animals won't eat it. So it would seem that the plants that we said before that are dye stuff, that are regularly used for dyeing, but they're only used for dyeing, not for eating. So typically animals wouldn't eat that. And if animals wouldn't eat that, it would seem that any kind of thing that's used for dyeing should have the mitzvah of beer. In yesterday's Mishnah, it says not that way. Yesterday's Mishnah, we learned that a plant that is used as a dye, it does have beer. So, but if the animals aren't going to eat it because it's not really edible, then why should it have beer? So this seems to be a discussion amongst the commentaries, and the Chazon Ish says that it really has to be that the dye stuff mentioned in Mishnah Aleph that will have a mitzvah beer has to be something animals would eat also. So that's why it's possible for the mitzvah beer to be relevant to it. Okay, so now the Mishnah continues, and the Mishnah now gives us examples, what we've been talking about. So again, Ezehu, what are these? Give me what are the examples of these of the laws of the things the Mishnah mentioned before. So Ikar haluf hashaita, luf hashaita, the wild luf, which we had yesterday, is a type of a wild onion. We're not talking about the onion itself. We're talking about ikar, the root, the ikar hadandano, or the root of mint. Akrabanin. Akrabanin has two explanations. Akrabanin is either it's a grass which grows near the base of palm trees and curls itself around them. That's one explanation. The second is that is a plant resembling a scorpion. Okay, but that's v'hachalbitzin. Chalbitzin are the root of the milky blossom, the Neitz HaChalav that we mentioned again in yesterday's Mishnah. Again, it's the root of that. But buchria, and buchria is some kind of a plant. Don't really have a good. Don't really seem to have to identify it here much. So again, these are all the examples that the way the Yad Avram explains that is examples that are neither human nor animal nor dye stuffs. They're the first example of the Mishnah. The first example of the Mishnah was that it doesn't fit in the category of any of these things. And what this means is it's not even under duress used. And therefore, as things that are not food or dye stuff at all, it's not going to, I'm sorry, back it up. I'm sorry. They are used under duress. That was the point of the Mishnah, the first half of the Mishnah. Therefore, the sanctity of Shemitah they have, but they don't have the mitzvah of beer. Okay. And then we have the Mishnah saying, maybe not savim. What are the examples of the plants for dyes of the first example, hapua barichba, pua and richba. Again, different types of plants. That again, in this case, these plants, these plants were actually regular dye stuff. However, they endured in the field all the time. Therefore, they're always available for the animals, and therefore it doesn't apply to them. So in the case of the dye stuff, what we have there, we have an example of where it would be used as dye stuff, but since it stays, it can stay on the ground and endure. It doesn't have the mitzvah. It doesn't have mitzvah beer. That's what the Mishnah repeats. Yesh lahem shvius, the shvius. The money they themselves have a sanctity of shemitah, and the money exchanged for that sanctity of shemitah. Ein lahem beer, v'le demehem beer. However, they nor their money, none of them have beer, because of, as we said before. Now, Rabbi Meir says an interesting halacha. The mayan mispa'arin at Rosh Hashanah. Their money has to be used up by Rosh Hashanah. The Meir, let me just finish the Mishnah. Amrulai, the sages said to him, "Wahen ein beer kavachamer l'dmeyan." The Meir is saying, although he mentioned all these things mentioned before, they themselves don't have beer, but the money that was exchanged for them does have beer. So the Chachamim say they don't have beer. If the actual plant itself doesn't have beer, then all the more so the money exchanged for it shouldn't have beer, because it only gets its sanctity from that. So what's the explanation of Meir? The explanation of Meir is the following. The Meir holds, if you're talking about the actual plant itself, you see the plant, you see what it is, and it's identified as a plant that doesn't have beer. But the money they used to exchange for it, you can't identify it as money that was exchanged for a plant that doesn't have beer. And therefore, the consider of Meir is, if you leave it around, you may come to use it, because you don't realize that it's special money. Therefore, Meir says, by Rosh Hashanah, you should use it up. Use it up means take the money, buy food with it. That food will now transfer the sanctity from the money onto the food. The food will be treated like Shemitah produce, and the money will be fine again. The money won't have any kind of sanctity, and you don't have no restrictions. And he says, and we want this done by Rosh Hashanah. I mean, by the time Shemitah year is over, there should be none of this money with condition Shviyah should be around. The truth is, if let's say the money lasts is around after Rosh Hashanah, you should be doing the same thing. You should be using it up to get the sanctity off of it. But Meir seems to be saying we would want that to be done by the end of the Shemitah year. So by the beginning of the 8th year, you don't have to worry about any of these things. Okay, we're going to stop now, not do the Sefer HaMitzvot, because in a few minutes the Siyum will be beginning. So have a great Erev Yontif. Hope your preparations go well. You have a Chakasha V'Sameach, very enjoyable. He just tried calling me.